from 18 African countries. So this was super fruitful and was a real good example how partnership can work out. So it was like a bilingual setup. We had like translators for French to English to French, both directions, and has participants from research, academia, as well as policy science. And therefore, we tried to bring together all different areas. So in that sense, we are strongly looking also forward to have like monthly webinars to enhance and to facilitate the individual plans that they can bring in their ministries or their institution where they are working. This is of great importance to say that we also submitted then for a side event at the COP, and luckily we could make it that we can also like present this great NDC fellowship program at COP27 and show how capacity building in NDC finance can take place. So saying that, I would like to spot a couple of slides. It's only 3 slides where I would like just to flag the recent trends and signs when it comes to NDC finance and the great needs. As I was able to be part of the recent assessment report 6 of the IPCC mitigation report, but also has some insights on the adaptation one. So what you can see here is like a clear trend, and this is like the latest findings of the evidence we have in the literature. And this figure was unfortunately not able to make it into the summary for policymakers, even it was intended to be there, but now it is placed in the technical summary a little bit below of visibility, but it is of great need and to see what is the current status. And as you can see here, there are clear trends, or there are like clear regions where the vulnerability to consequences of climate change is at the greatest. So in the African continent, there are majorly the biggest threats and hazards expected at the cause of the climate change. So food insecurity, health issues, and other concerns are heavily distributed there, and that should be always on the top of the discussions, and those figure makes it really make this really obvious. So, but when we talk about adaptation finance, we need actually, especially for in less developed spheres, much more adaptation finance than mitigation finance. But what it is at the moment, it is still, because of different reasons, that much more mitigation finance, large tech, renewable energy deployment, and so on, where existing business cases are available, takes place, and not much on adaptation. So for COP27, it is of great need to make progress, especially on the Finance Day, on the post-2025 targets with regarding of a climate finance target beyond the 100 billion agreement, and also on the balance between mitigation and adaptation. And therefore, belongs also like a reconsideration of the discussion regarding what is counted as climate mitigation and adaptation finance and what not, with regard to grant equivalent consideration. So it is also of great importance to see that we still have there's so many investment gaps available, but they are also there just due to misalignment of finance flows. So there is the capital markets, the financial system is so broad and so large, but still too many investments take place in high carbon fields like fossil fuel extraction and so on. So if you see in 2020, there has been still more fossil fuel investments deployed than climate-related investments, as well as double the size of fossil fuel subsidies compared to renewable energy subsidies. So this should also be taken in mind that there is like a large misalignment of finance flows, and it is not only about more and more and more finance, it is also about the redirection and doing less harm to our climate ecosystem. Actually, this was already the few slides I wanted to show to you today. And with that, I will also like close this short speech and hand over back to the moderator. And I'm happy to be available also for some questions and clarifications in so raise your hand or type it in the chat. Thank you. Are you on mute? Sorry, we can't hear you.
It is still, you are muted.
Sorry, I was just muted. Thank you, Mr. Michael, project manager of Frankfurt School. Thank you for joining with us, and I hope everyone understand the presentation about about Mr. Michael's presentation. And our next speaker is. There are two speakers will both sharing with us the presentation and this is third planning of financing. There is Mr. Rangapalwala, Commonwealth National Climate Finance Advisor, Village Giovanni Henry, Assistant Research Officer, Climate Change Secretariat, Commonwealth. And I am pass the mic to them, and I hope they will share with us the enhancing access to NDCs financing. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. I hope I can be heard clearly. Can I get a thumbs up that I can be heard clearly? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So of course, as mentioned, Giovanni Henry, alongside my colleague, Mr. Ranga Palawa, Commonwealth National Climate Finance Advisor based in Belize, and myself based in St. Lucia. So of course, on this session, we'll speak about in terms of enhancing access to NDC financing. To help with that, I would just share screen. I don't think I have access as yet. Can I get access by the host? Should allow me to share screen. Let's see. Yeah. Okay. Well, you will let me know as well when it's. I think I can now. Yeah. Share screen. Yes, you should be able to see my slides now. Right. Just see this. Okay, perfect. Yeah. So of course, like we mentioned, through the Commonwealth Climate Change Program. So in brief, I'll just speak to what exactly the program does, particularly from the youth end. And then of course, my colleague Ranga would speak in particular into enhancing access to the NDC financing element. So within the climate change program, just one of our main focus is focusing on strengthening the resilience of our member countries, 56 member countries, to the impacts of climate change. So we help in terms of building capacity, particularly for enhancing access to finance. And yeah, so this just more or less provides a overview of our broad areas of focus. One around accelerating action around land. We have our Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, which we'll speak more in depth about. Our Common Sensing program, which is sort of an innovative program in the Pacific, which utilizes observation data. So I'm not sure there's anyone even in that field on this call as well. And of course, one thing which remains strewn across all of our programming is youth and gender considerations. And of course, on the health aspect. So in terms of the support which we provide, generally from the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, or you'd hear me using the word CFA a lot as a shortened form. It focuses along these sort of 6 main areas where we help in building, developing bankable projects. So my colleague Ranga, who is based in Belize, would support the governments there in developing project proposals accordingly in that regard, providing climate policy support, of course, readiness, including accreditation and so on, support, and general human and institutional capacity development, as well as knowledge management and learning, because we believe that our experiences are worth sharing. Similar in sessions like these are quite useful to be able to share that knowledge and strengthen and help upskill existing initiatives. So yes, I would have just mentioned here the just this snapshot just provides just a snapshot of what we've been able to sort of help support countries in. So, and again, it goes against several sectors. So about 50 million worth of climate finance supported in mobilizing. And of course, you can see the countries which we have been sort of active in. So currently we are in about 14 countries thereabout, and which we have a national climate finance advisor. And of course, we now have regional advisors who support the efforts in these countries. So on the financing end, NDC in particular, so one of the partners which we have, which has sort of supported our efforts, is that of the NDC partnership. And recently they had the Climate Action Enhancement Package Initiative. So we would have supported countries in, again, it's focusing on enhancing NDC implementation and fast tracking the progress by member countries. So we help in providing different level of support. So one of the key things, which, for example, in Belize, we would have helped develop a climate finance landscape and also a climate finance strategy policy, which would then help the country in mobilizing and unlocking finance. And of course, young people have a critical role to play within that, which we'll get into, mobilizing the finance, because NDC implementation, like I would have mentioned earlier on, it is important that we mainstream the involvement of young people at all stages. So we'll get into that a little later. Of course, we talk about how we can private sector. So we did that work in Eswatini along private sector. And also we did sort of climate finance mapping exercises in Zambia. So you can see that our involvement, of course, for member countries crosses across the region. So that is why there's a strong learning and strong knowledge exchange, which can be facilitated within there. Also one of our newest initiatives in Grenada, where we're helping to support in developing a resource mobilization strategy for the NDC implementation. Of course, now that we know with most countries which would have submitted their revised NDCs, and now with COP27, there's sort of considered the implementation COP. So therefore, a lot of our technical assistance provided is in that regard. And yeah, this just provides just a snapshot of some of the products which have been developed under that initiative. And this is including one of our own, where we looked at to building on a knowledge management aspect to it, where we sort of gathered our experiences from the CIFA, like I would have mentioned, and we have developed that toolkit, which can be used to help in accessing climate finance by countries, organizations, NGOs, and so on. And maybe just in brief on the youth end, as we from the Secretariat end, so we have many of you, I'm sure some of you would know the Commonwealth Youth Climate Change Network. Of course, we sort of help in terms of policy support and advocacy and that kind of thing. So for instance, that's why ahead of COP26, we sort of released a Commonwealth Youth Statement on climate change, which gave an indication of young people's priorities to help feed into the discussions at pre-COP and also at COP. Of course, we have the Youth Development Index, which is available online. And also we're going into more of sort of green entrepreneurship, a focus on green jobs, and using our expertise, seeing how we can support young people in one, upscaling the existing initiative in that regard, but also helping with developing new initiatives within that field and how we can support them in accessing finance and unlocking the finance, because I'm sure some would say that there is a finance available. It's just about how do we sort of unlock it, and there's always that challenge both at the country level and also at the for NGOs and other organizations. So speaking of the challenges I'm facing in that regard, I would invite my colleague Ranga to just speak on that, on how to integrate young people in NDC implementation, and then on the financing element to it.
Right. Thank you, Giovanni. I hope everybody can hear me clearly. First of all, thank you very much for inviting this webinar. And it's been a while for me being invited to participate in a youth event. So thank you very much for that. I feel very youthful with that. I'll take the presentation as Giovanni mentioned. So I want to talk about the challenges of integrating youth people in the NDC implementation. I think there are several challenges, of course, but we have seen some encouraging progress as well. So that also I want to highlight before talking about challenges. One of the biggest challenges that we have seen in the countries is about the institutional mechanisms and processes within the countries and at the global level. Because whatever said and done, climate change has been kind of a new knowledge curve for most of the countries, developing countries. We have been feeling the impacts of climate change not about 50 years ago, right? We haven't seen that. So it's quite new if you look at the length of the human civilization. So the institutional mechanisms and the processes within the country of implementing climate action is quite young or quite immature. So those institutional mechanisms often has not considered young people's engagement in that. So that's a challenge, and we need to overcome that. And of course, there are several attempts to that as well. Limited access for climate information is another issue. Of course, it's a broader issue, but it's hindered young people's engagement, because you need to have a lot more climate information to make decisions with regards to climate change. NDC implementation is all about that. So without information, so that means your capacity to engage in decision-making processes are hindered. So lack of access to information is a big one. And the limited capacity to access resources is another one, because we know there are a lot more climate funds have been emerged over the last decade or so, and there are so many other donors also entering into the landscape of climate financing. But the capacities that you require to access those financing is also there, because there are certain standards that they are following based on some of the justification. So there's a huge gap between the capacities expected in accessing climate finance, as well as what we have in reality. So bridging this gap is quite important, and it acts as a challenge. And of course, the national policy space available for youth engagement is also very limited. And as I mentioned, one thing is, of course, climate change is a new challenge for the country. So they're trying to adapt that. And after Paris agreements, we have just rolled out the NDC processes. But on the other hand, we had general youth engagement gaps, the policy space gaps in terms of that. So when you merge these together, so it's an amplified situation. So it's as challenging for young people to engage in the NDC implementation. But at the same time, there are opportunities available for youth to engage in the process. One is, of course, the inclusion aspects of the NDC revision process is there, because NDC cycle is going to be 1.5 years. Of course, it's a continuous process. We're looking towards a kind of a transformative process to address the climate change challenges. So there are inclusion aspects coming in, and there are a lot more discussions coming in, and it's really encouraging to see the youth groups are engaging actively to advocate to this process. So it's acting as an opportunity. I hope we might be able to tap into those opportunities more than what we see at the moment. Research and innovations, it's always important. Innovation is something that we need to look in, and of course, young people or youth engagement in innovation is much more than the other categories in the society. So it's an opportunity for the youth people to engage in research and keep on innovating new things in different platforms, in different aspects in climate change or in this implementation is quite important. But at the same time, we have seen, as far as the climate finance is concerned, from the donors and from the fund side, there's a huge interest of engaging youth in the process. So it acts as an opportunity. So there will be a lot more opportunities for people to come in and there will be resources flowing in, and hopefully this will be significant in the coming few years as well. Javanik was talking about the green entrepreneurship, but we see a lot of youth engagement in the entrepreneurship. It's not just the conventional business space, but we see a lot more interest from people in terms of social enterprises, the green enterprises, or mixture of that. So we see new innovations and active platforms coming in for youth entrepreneurship, and now the whole the digital and online space giving a lot more opportunities for youth to engage in this the green entrepreneurship. So I think these are opportunities because it can contribute significantly to NDC implementation. Next slide, please. So as Javanik mentioned, the Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub, the CFA, has been supporting countries to assessing the climate finance landscape, because it's quite important to understand what's happening in terms of financing, because NDC implementation is highly contingent with access and availability of finance. So there are certain challenges in that front. One, of course, when it comes to definition of climate finance at the UNFCCC level, you might know that we have still grappling around the issue of definition of climate finance. So it's there in the countries as well. How do you define climate finance? And without a proper definition, of course, assessing, tracking, and verifying climate finance has always become an issue. So it's been, I think it's sometimes it's underestimated and sometimes it's overestimated. So therefore, it's a challenge. It's still a global challenge to assess the climate finance landscape. Data and information is always a big issue. One is lack of data, because climate finance is being a kind of a cross-cutting issue. Sometimes climate change is integrated into development activities, and you don't have a kind of a boundary line to understand what's climate finance and what's general developmental finance. So without that real border, of course, it's very difficult, especially the mainstream or cross-cutting the development initiative. It's very difficult to assess the landscape and the donors' appetite on that. Domestic and private finance data is quite lacking. Domestic in the sense locally, the people, the private sector are investing on climate change to address climate change, but again, it's hidden. Most of the data is not available, and these are challenges. And definitely, youth groups have a role to play how to overcome this challenge. So we have a proper climate finance landscape in our analysis. And again, I want to highlight the lack of stakeholder engagement space in accessing climate finance is also a big issue. So some of the segments are not being captured properly, and I think there are a lot of gray areas in that. But at the same time, it's an opportunity accessing the climate finance landscape. One opportunity is we have a global architecture, or what we call the landscape for climate finance, and it's been shaping up over the years. So we know what's the basic architecture, and it's about how to apply that, how to appropriately adapt that to different countries and different contexts is there. So it's an opportunity. We have something to build up.
Aku punya dia pakai link. Kasihan dia mungkin nggak bisa.
I hear some disturbances. I hope it will be done. Sorry. It can be used as a kind of a baseline. Once you assess the climate finance landscape in a country or global wise, we can use it as a baseline to define and craft our climate finance strategy, so we can be more strategic in terms of accessing finance. And of course, when you have a good climate finance landscape, it can be used as a rational basis for you to do advocacy. In a while, you said Michael was presenting about the lack of climate finance, the comparison between the fossil fuel investments and renewable energy investment or climate finance. So you have some rationale. If you have understand good, what's a climate finance is, so you can craft your advocacy strategies according to that. Next, please. Why national climate finance strategies are important? Of course, Commonwealth Climate Finance Access Hub has been advocating and supporting our member countries to have national climate finance strategies along with NDC, because one is, it's a very important NDC implementation tool, because with a proper financing strategy, the NDCs become very realistic to achieve. Otherwise, it's become just a wish list if you don't have enough resources to implement that. So once you have a national climate finance strategy, so nationally you have a kind of an approach where you can implement the NDCs in a realistic way. And of course, it's provide a kind of a strategic and integrated approach. Integrated approach in the sense, if you look at NDCs, if you look at the climate change challenges, it's cut across many sectors, horizontally and vertically. The solutions are also coming from different angles. It's not one blanket approach, one blanket solution is there for climate change or NDC implementation. So having a climate finance strategy, you have a strategic approach, and it is an integrated approach. So the different requirement, different segments have been considered in a holistic way. And we know climate change is a kind of a transformative process. You can't have an overnight solution for climate change because it's been developed and evolved over the years. So what we need to see is it's a transformative process. You need to make sure that you create conducive environment for future actions to enhance climate actions. So once you do a national climate finance strategy, we have seen our member countries that it provides them with a holistic view and what would be the transformative pathway they want to see. It's not just the climate actions they want to finance, but also building relevant capacity so they can continue with the climate action. So national climate finance strategies not only providing the core climate finance access, but building capacities and activating that transformative process within the countries. So definitely it can trigger and create engagement space for many groups, including youth. The opportunities for that is like there's a lot more kind of a tendency among the donors and funds to go towards programming approach for financing against project approach, because we have seen most of the time the climate finance coming for a specific project. Of course, projects are important. I don't say that projects are not important, but we have seen now donors are looking at, rather than looking at a single project, they would see a kind of a program and the financing coming through programs. Of course, we have seen that with the Green Climate Fund, and we see when countries are developing their nationally determined contributions and national adaptation plan, etc., it gives a frame for a program approach. And when the donors are also triggered towards that, so it's an opportunity to go at, and it's very demanding, and there are cross-cutting nature of climate impacts. So you can't invest on one sector per se. You need to think of that holistic view. So national climate finance strategies providing that platform to build on that. Youth-led climate action is quite important, and we believe a transformative process to address climate change challenges definitely must give enough and bigger space for youth, because you are going to make decisions in the future. So if this process is not set, youth engagement is not there, of course, our transformative process that we are thinking will be bleak in the future. So what are the opportunities, and what we have seen kind of best practice? Of course, youth might have a lot of opportunities to access small grant schemes. It can be from the donors, from different funds. We have seen these are coming up. And I think that gives a lot more chances to youth groups to engage in project development towards climate action. And it's also give an orientation, as I mentioned, you're going to make decisions on behalf of the entire world or entire human civilization in the upcoming years. So it's a transition process. So it's an integrated process, and there should be a just transition from what we have and what we want in the future. So youth engagement is important, and we see a lot more opportunities coming up from the donor side, from the fund side, that this the integrated and just transition orientation is coming in, where youth engagement is a must. And we see A lot of participatory approaches are being integrated into project, and it has become an integral part. Participatory in the sense the engagement space for planning, in action and decision making. So definitely this is very important aspect for youth engagement. As I mentioned, capacity creation and knowledge sharing must be an integral part. So youth can play a big role for it. And we are talking about Generation Z now, where their dimensions of the entire world is completely different, and where you need to do certain targeted knowledge sharing the processes to bring them on board. So I think there are opportunities coming in for bring up creative capacity building and knowledge sharing actions. I think these are best practices you can integrate into projects. Finally, I would like to talk about what are the innovative financing instruments where youth-led climate actions can consider. Some are, of course, at the very grassroots level, but at the same time, you can think of large-scale aspects as well. Conventionally, we have been talking about grants and loans and these kind of things, but these innovative financing instruments are quite important. We have been talking about green entrepreneurship or social entrepreneurship or a mixture of it. I think youth groups are now quite interested to move into this entrepreneurial space, and equity and venture capital funds are now growing, in an exponential rate, with a lot of these funds being impact oriented rather than looking at the financial returns. So these are becoming an instrument for youth groups to capitalize on, and not to go on grant orientation, but we need to think of more of how to use the blended financing options, so you can scale up or you can mobilize additional finances towards climate action. And CIFA, Commonwealth, we are now working with several countries on debt for climate swap. You have seen a huge debt unsustainability issue cropped up around the world, especially in the developing countries, soon after the COVID-19 pandemic, because it affected the economies badly. So the countries couldn't manage their debt as it's supposed to be. So this unsustainability creating a lot of issues. And once it, of course, exacerbate or amplify the climate impacts, at the same time, it dilapidates the economies as well. So debt for climate swap is a kind of a instrument where you can tackle all these two aspects together. So it's coming in a kind of an important as well as interesting instrument to explore. And in that instrument, of course, there are a lot of activities, not engaging in the financing, but a lot of awareness creation and advocacy related work is required because it matters with the larger economies. So I think there's a lot of space for youth to engage in the process of debt for climate swap as an interesting and innovative tool. Then the bonds, of course, it's been there, the bonds as a way of mobilizing financing from the market. But now the green bonds, blue bonds, and social bonds are coming up with new dimensions. And definitely you need to look into that, and the youth might grab these new concepts very soon. And we need engagement of people to understand how these instruments work and streamline that with the climate financing initiatives. Finally, I would like to talk about crowdsourcing. Of course, crowdsourcing has been there in the development space, and we have seen a lot of youth engagement of crowdsourcing of funds for charities and ground level development. But now with the expansion of the digital world and the digitalization of world, crowdsourcing has expanded its boundaries beyond geographical limitations. And youth are really good at it, how to crowdfund some of the initiatives. So in terms of youth-led climate action, I see a huge potential, untapped potential of crowdsourcing of financing from different ones. If you blend it with other instruments, or if you think of blended financing options, coupling with crowdsourcing, I think youth groups might have enormous amount of potential to engage in climate action. So Giovanni, I will hand it over back to you so you can facilitate the question and answer sessions. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Ranga. We had some discussion points, but I know you guys had a Q&A sort of set after this, so maybe I'll just take this down and then we can probably take inputs from that during the discussion.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think you can proceed.
Should I continue or is it?
Yes, just proceed, say for 10 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. So essentially, we just wanted to get sort of course, we spoke about the financing instruments and unlocking NDC financing, and of course, we know that young people are always quite innovative with the ideas and always have new and areas that could potentially really help in unlocking that financing aspect. So we had two questions, essentially along the lines of what financing instruments you think will support your efforts. Ranga would have spoken about some of these as well. So what beyond that list, what do you think, or just general thoughts on that would help? Because of course, like we would have said from the Commonwealth end, we provide that technical assistance to help in terms of accessing NDCs and developing NDCs and in terms of the financing for implementation. So I'm sure if there are any ideas from there, we would be grateful to have that on. I think it can be done probably by raising your hand, or if that's possible. Then we can get some inputs from there. I think I can see the screen. And also on the second one, because I know that from various different organizations. So what role can your organization play in supporting that national effort in mobilizing finance for NDC implementation? So these are just two questions which we can start a discussion on. So I guess you can also do it via the chat. I'm not sure if I can see the chat.
There are a few questions in the chat, Giovanni. Probably I can take those. I don't know whether we are going to take those now or later on.
Younger colleagues, should we take the questions now, or do we get inputs from the participants on this? No.
I believe we can take the questions together, and like if the participants wants to add their insights to this discussion questions, and then we can do it together.
Sí, es que no me está dando sueño y dura hasta la 1 de la mañana despierta.
Somebody may need to mute. We also have the option to include your
Ya son
inputs
muchos días, entonces ya también el cuerpo lo resiente.
So that can also be done as well if you are able to write it via here and would see the word cloudy in here. So there's a link in the chat which can be used as well to include your responses to the first question. Maybe just yet to take the questions on. I think here. Okay, I hope I don't miss the questions, but yeah.
Maybe I can assist you to point out the questions.
That would help, yeah, sure.
Yeah, my name is Leah Aoko. I'm from the Africa Research and Impact Network as a policy researcher, and I'll be assisting with the Q&A session. So definitely we'll be doing that with you. The first question is from Birendra Rai. I'm just taking it from the chat, and it says, where do you see climate finance or investment in the next 5 years? Will it still be relevant, or will we need other innovative ways to tackle the effects of climate change? So from your perspective, I think you can tackle that.
Okay, I will talk about it. And internationally, you all know that we have been grappling with this word like $100 billion a year, dollars a year, kind of a climate change targets. And now we see increasingly in the negotiations we are talking about, well, we can't speak in billions now. We need to talk trillions. because of the incremental effects of climate change and the need and the demand for climate finance has, increased significantly. So on one side, that means the demand for climate finance is increasing, and it's alarming as well. So it goes hand in hand with other climate actions as well. So we can't just, do business as usual actions and development actions and demanding more climate finance. So we need to change our pathways and accordingly do it. But the very clear line is that it needs to go together. That's why I said we need to talk about a transformative change. So climate finance, of course, will flow in with the demand. Demand in the sense should not be like very abstract request for financing, but you need to come up with a clear plan how we are going to utilize the financing and for what we are going to do that. I think the demand side is shaping up. We have seen over the years, of course, the first NDC cycle you have seen, we came up with NDCs like wish list. But now when we look at the second or the NDC updates, which came this year and last year, those are very strong and very pragmatic and practical, most of them. And still we see certain wish lists as well. But those are pragmatic, and at the same time, there are a lot more other supporting things are happening in the background. We are getting more clear national adaptation plans. We are getting more kind of a low emission development strategies from the world. And even the NDCs are coming with the implementation support tool, the NDC implementation plans, resource mobilization strategies, climate finance strategies, as well. So the demand side is shaping up. And at the same time, not in the same rate, but we see the supply side is also changing. It's not from the conventional bilateral public financing only, but from the other sources of finances as well. We see a lot more interesting stuff happening in the private sector. If you look at how many the private sector individuals, large corporates including, are trying to invest in green businesses, not only in mitigation per se, but in the adaptation as well. So I see a really good trend with the private investments. But of course, in terms of the public finances available from the donor countries, basically from the on top of the ODA, their contributions have a lot of challenges. I feel, because we see global economy wise, we are moving into a recession. That's what we are getting the signals from the institutions like IMF and even the regional development banks, and even some of the central banks have now forecasted that we are moving into a recession. So recession means the lower economic growth and the amount of tax money available from the donor countries might be reduced. So there will be a potentially reduction in the contributions for overall developmental finances and climate financing. So there might be certain gaps, but at the same time, I see there are opportunities to bridge the gap by using the available sources effectively and efficiently and in a strategic way. That's where the climate finance strategies are coming handy. So in terms of quantities, it's quite premature for us to gauge and see, okay, this is the amount of climate finance that will be available in the next 5 years.
I think that's a very interesting perspective, and I like the fact that you're saying both sides are taking shape. So that's a reality that we need to contend with. I'll read a comment from Kali, who says, speaking of the lack of transparency and lack of finance data, one of the difficulties when lobbying with the government is that they are unwilling to disclose, or even if they do, making them accountable is very hard. And goes ahead to request for any case studies to look into. I'd advise that Michael perhaps gets in touch with you, because he has dealt with interesting case studies from the fellowship program that was undertaken with the Frankfurt School and the Africa Research and Impact Network. So that would be instrumental in answering your question and speaking to your comment, Kali. I also see that there are hands up from my screen. I'll give an opportunity to Suba Al-Khaldi to go ahead and ask your question, please.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Yes. First of all, I'd like to thank both of you for the amazing presentation. It was very insightful. I have put my question in the chat, but I can also say it as well now. So how to ensure that climate financing policies are not choosing winners in terms of funding accessibility or availability. For example, as we know, there are like some funds for green hydrogen or specific technologies. Those are choosing granting exclusive access to funds to these companies or efforts. So how can that be done, financing in a just way? Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. Climate access, would you take that as well?
I can take that. Of course, there are different types of financing channels and instruments. And if you see the example that you have came is, of course, it's a what you call a private channel. It's a small channel focusing on one particular objective. And there are some other sources, of course, the objectives are quite broader and the availability of funds. So whatever said and done, of course, the availability of funds or finances within the fund matters a lot in decision making. But some of the private investments, of course, the investment criteria are decided by the donors or that particular institution engagement. So there are certain limitations of advocating on that. But what we can advocate on about the finances allocation of the globally available public funds, for example, the mechanisms that we have established under the UNFCCC, the finance mechanism, the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, the JEF and Special Climate Change Fund, whatever. So those actually have certain the policies and standards, and we have the ability to advocate to those funds to change their policies and procedures based on the demand and the needs. And it's a process and it's happening. So of course, UNFCCC, the climate finance, climate change legislation is a part of it. But there are specific funds, as you have mentioned, certain technology-related funds and stuff. So definitely those need to align with their own criteria. And of course, it's going with NECTICAL. But funding allocation, of course, there are a lot more need to things happen. So from a donor side, whether it's a private company, whether it's a government, or whether it's a multilateral climate fund, allocation of climate finance must be decided based on the demand, and that's where I need a lot of knowledge sharing, and of course demand need to be more clear. I think it's a process. We have a lot of challenges and gaps. I do agree, but at the same time I'm very positive that some of these gaps are being addressed through the process. Even though it's slow, it's happening. So I think let's be positive, and we recognize that there are positives as well as negatives, and we try to advocate for these negative aspects as much as possible through a meaningful engagement. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, thank you so much for your response. I think I could just add that when it comes to climate financing, it's important that countries come together with the various stakeholders who are involved, so that then they're able to prioritize needs. Because when you think about climate change and the people who are being directly affected, you'll see that there are vulnerable groups whose needs have to be addressed. So when we are looking at NDCs, it should not be in an abstract form, but all these stakeholders should come together and look at what are the priority areas for financing and who are being affected, which are the vulnerable groups. How can we ensure that climate financing is inclusive when you think about gender and children and persons with disabilities? So we need to ensure that as we discuss climate financing, it is an inclusive process, whether it's in terms of the areas that would be affected, the sectors that would be affected, the people who are affected. It needs to be an inclusive process so that then no one is left out. I'll give an opportunity to Techno Common 12. Please tell us your name and ask your question.
Yeah, hello. Good day, everyone. My name is Daniel Wanyakan. I'm based in Lagos, Nigeria. I want to ask, what are the climate change entirely? When I look at climate change and I see who are those people to be impacted that can impact more on climate, my research goes down into the locals, and we look at locals as one of the major points that we can use in affecting climate. For example, you can't expect someone who is a white collar job going out to enhance climate change in his or own environment because of they're all busy. The only people that are very, very responsible and are willing to do this climate projects will be the locals. So what are the things, what are the facilities provided for locals who have not really gotten this opportunity to have efficient education, awareness, and funding, especially funding to enhance climate change in their various environments? What are the provisions or reward for locals when it comes to climate change? That's my question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll take another question so that they can be tackled together. Abhishek Shube, please go ahead.
So thank you, ma'am, for giving me this opportunity to speak this question. My question is to Ranga sir, that despite of the fact that there have been a significant improvement in terms of the climate finance, the CBDR, that is the Common but Differentiated Responsibilities, has created, according to many scholars, an iron curtain between the developed and the developing countries. Now, when it comes to the climate finance, there have been a significant improvement in terms of financing. For example, there is facilities like Global Environment Facility. There have been global climate funds. There are special climate funds and the least developed countries climate fund. But despite of the fact, the promised amounts that is being promised, they have not reached to the hands of the developing countries. And ultimately, some or the other way down, there have been a lack in terms of the implementation of the climate justice in these countries. So, sir, my question is very straightforward, that being a youth of a developing country, I belong from India, how we can mobilize the people of the nation to get integrated into this process of climate finance and, take our voices to the developed world to give us the granted amount, and ultimately there can be a prosperity in the global arena. So this is my questions.
Thank you so much. And may I request Giovanni to take the question on locals ensuring that they are aware, or how can they participate in climate financing? Giovanni, are you able to take that?
Yes, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, yeah, that's actually an interesting point raised. So in fact, we recognize that. So in delivering our technical assistance, and we're trying to see how can we ensure that it reaches, like you said, those that are sort of on the front lines of the climate change. So one of the things that we try to incorporate within one of our new programs, for example, that is our Commonwealth Call to Action on Living Lands, which focusing around accelerating action on land. One of the key elements within that plan is that of indigenous and traditional knowledge, and where we would look to see how we can incorporate that in developing a resilience efforts and so on. So that will be a central pillar within the sort of implementation of that Living Lands program. So we ensure that whatever interventions that will tackle the Free Rio Convention, both in the biodiversity, climate change, and land degradation. So within that space as well, we ensure that indigenous people and traditional knowledge are central within that space. So it's ensure, and of course, like I said, it's a way of ensuring that we get that input from that level, and then our actions can sort of benefit those most things. So yeah, it is a priority within the sort of work that we would do. I think on the maybe on the second point, I can come in as well briefly on that as well, in terms of mobilizing and how can young people, I can probably share some good experiences from that as well, in terms of how do you move from being able to, I think, sort of shift the needle within the climate change space within the national landscape. And of course, you know, we talk about the challenges, but one of the, for example, positives I can mention from my local experience is that some countries, they would have what you call a National Climate Change Committee, you know, the National Sustainable Development Committee. And there would be an opportunity, it may not be direct, but there would be it serves as an opportunity for youth-led organizations to sort of see how they can get a seat on that table. And I'll probably go back to COP just briefly, where I know for one of the sort of key outcomes from a youth lens was, I think, regarding the CTCN, the Technology Center, where I think we did that youth go awarded a seat on that board, I believe, out of COP26. So that was a positive step. So in a similar way, at a national level, of course, we have many organizations represented here today within your local context. You can see that once you have, of course, a reputable, you know, reputation and so on, and you feel that you can make a contribution, I see no challenge in being able to sort of, you know, put forward a proposal to the relevant, you know, agency at a national level to say that, okay, we have this entity with, let's say, you know, 200 young people or so. We have experience in that regard. We want to be able to contribute to the national policy. And in that way, you are awarded that seat. And it's about how do you capitalize on that seat at the table. It's about, of course, that is up to the organization to see how you can do that. But I think that is one positive I've seen, having sat on the local board here as well from St. Lucia through my youth organization. I can see how you've been able to be part of it, because it's a start. So then eventually we become invited to NDC revision process, and then we're part of the NDC implementation, and we're invited to all the consultations, provided an input. So that is one very basic, but it's also a useful way of being able to sort of shift the needle in terms of mobilizing and being able to impact positively at the national level.
All right. Thank you so much, Giovanni, for that response. I think that's insightful. I just like to add that when it comes to communities, they need to feel involved, right? So when you're going to them with all this information in terms of advocacy, they do not, some of them do not even contextualize the changes that are happening in their environment in terms of climate change. So they may not understand what you're trying to tell them. But when we leverage on aspects such as research and evidence, and we approach these local communities, then they'll be able to see, they'll be able to take note that this is happening because of 1, 2, 3. That rationalizing process for most communities is very important. Another aspect is letting them take the lead in all these solutions that we are trying to find. When we speak about climate financing, they themselves could come up with innovative ways to address the gaps that we are witnessing in climate finance, in as much as we are waiting for the funds to trickle down, you know, the 10%, as the UNDP report puts it, to trickle down to these local communities. They themselves have the capability to strategize and come up with innovative ways to address climate change and leverage on climate finance. Another aspect that I had wanted to involve is, for the young people, most of government entities and private sectors, they will not hear you if you do not have data, if you do not have evidence and research. So this is an area that we need to take advantage of and sharpen our skills in, so that then when we are approaching them, that there's a green project that would be useful perhaps for your local community. They're able to identify and they're able to say that indeed it's useful because it has evidence behind it and it is properly backed. So I'd like to give an opportunity to Lansina, TO, to ask their question. Lansina?
Hello, how are you?
Hi.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Lansina from Burkina Faso. Last year at COP26 in Glasgow, I meet NDC partnership staff in the pavilion, and I stay in touch with the staff. I write a project and I send the project to NDC partnership. They ask me to go to the Ministry of Environment. They have focal point there, and this partnership has a focal point in my country. I meet the two persons, I give my project, and I don't know if my project has been sent to the NDC partner for finance. 3 months, I'm waiting for, I don't have information. Is it there a way to verify if the project is sent to NDC partnership? What is the way to know that? I have to set up my, to launch my project before the COP27, but I have no information. And my guy said to me, you have to wait for, I don't know what is the rules to know if the project will be financed or not. It is that my question. I don't know if you understand me with my English. I don't know if you understand.
Yeah,
okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. Okay. Before I give Brex an opportunity, perhaps I'd like to comment that you'll probably need to get in touch with NDC partnership themselves, who can then say the status of your project, whether it has been approved or not. Perhaps it may be undergoing a review process. So definitely on their website, I think we can post that in the chat. You can just send an email to them, and I'm positive that they'll be able to respond to the same. They are responsive, that I know for sure. I'll give Brex an opportunity to ask his question. Go ahead.
Hi, I just have 2 questions, if that's okay, and I'll try to make it real quick.
That's fine.
My first question is, and it can be addressed by anyone. My first question is, to what extent do you think communities and NGOs refer to the NDCs when they're applying for climate finance? Because based on the discussion, I'm feeling like there's a little disconnect and things are not necessarily coordinated between the government and then NGOs and communities. And my second question is, I'm wondering if you have any ideas of best practices on measuring adaptation impact. And I'm asking this question because this is a particular concern that has been raised in the current NCQG process, which is trying to define the parameters of climate finance in 2024 and 2025. So I'm just wondering, if you could address those questions. Thanks.
Very interesting questions there. And before I give my 2 cents, I'll invite Ranga to address both questions raised by Brex. Ranga?
Before I address that, there was a pending question from Abhishek, which we didn't take up. He asked the question about the common but differentiated responsibility and the developed countries not being playing their role in terms of finance the commitments. Of course, these are kind of a long-standing argument. I look at it kind of a demand and supply side. Of course, we have come to the process is slow. That's the only thing. But we have been very successful in advocating certain things with the countries. I'll give an example. I don't want to reveal my age, but when I was a youth in the engagements, when a country got an invitation very first time to engage in the IPCC process, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the invitation directly goes to the Met Department because it's called climate and it's about Met. So we have had no understanding of what is climate change is, right? And since then, I'm talking about 1994, and now you can see the changes, how we have changed our institutional mechanisms now and how the climate change is being tackled in our own countries and internationally, right? So we have come a long way in the knowledge curve, even in the advocacy process. When it comes to CBD, CBD one, I mean, the common but differentiated responsibilities, the work that we have done on loss and damage, for example, right? In the very first example, when the loss and damage cropped up in Copenhagen in 2009, first time in the negotiations, no one wanted to talk about climate-induced disasters and climate-induced loss and damages now. So you can see how far we have come now. So we're now talking even the loss and damage finance within the UNFCCC process. So we have been able to change some of the stances, but I do agree there's a gap. There's a huge gap. And there's the process is very slow. We are not reaching our targets by the timeline. So we need to tackle this thing kind of an effective way. So why it's happening? Why it's happening? Of course, one is from the developed country perspective, they are talking about their economies and they have certain political stances. And our countries also have certain political stances. Our country, I'm talking about developing countries. So there is a gap. But at the same time, when we are blaming, this is kind of other side of the coin. I do agree that the countries who are responsible for climate change has not done enough. That's the baseline in my argument. But on the other hand, the developing countries have also not done enough to address this gap, right? In terms of stakeholder engagement, in terms of their actions, in terms of keeping priorities in climate change in their development agenda, there are gaps as well. So there are areas where we need to advocate. That's where I think youth advocacy is important, where you need to advocate both at your developing country at the same time pushing the developed countries to come together. So we are bridging the gap, I see, but the paining part is it takes a long time and which we can't afford. So we need to work on it. The other questions about the Brecht's question about the best practice of measuring the adaptation impacts. Of course, this is again a kind of a gigantic question, which we have been struggling for ages now. More than 20 years, we are struggling to find out what are the indicators of good adaptation, because it's very difficult because it's highly mingled with general development or sustainable development. So it's integrated with sustainable development as well. So it has environmental aspect, it has a social aspect as well as it has a financial aspect or the economic aspects. So one indicator alone might not measure adaptation. What we need to do is how you combine these indicators and come up with a combined measurement of it. The issue of giving kind of a, to compare, of course, we can't have just qualitative data. We need to come up with some sort of a quantification. That's where we are struggling yet. Of course, there have been a lot of other kind of instruments or tools that have been developed by different countries, different institutions. They have been using different one example is the what do you call the 5 capital based adaptation, where you try to measure and quantify the social capital, the financial capital, the natural capital, human capital, and physical capitals together, and you give weightage and come up with an indicator. So this has been using widely for sustainable development as well. But again, when you are giving a kind of a weighted average, that becomes very objective or subjective sometimes, right? So people give different weightages. So that's where we need struggling. So I think I don't have an answer for that. But the best, I can't say best practice. But only thing I can say is that one single indicator cannot measure adaptation. It needs to be multiple indicators, and that's where we're working on it. I can't remember whether I missed another question from Brex. I can remember there was another one. Unfortunately, I couldn't note that out.
The other question from Brex was on whether the involvement of communities and NGOs in reference to NDCs, because there seems to be a disconnect between the government and the communities.
If I could just clarify the question. I was just asking, to what extent do communities and NGOs who are applying for finance refer to the NDCs?
Okay,
thank you.
Thanks, Brex. The financing, of course, there's a disconnect between the finance needs and the finance supply. Of course, especially the grassroots, where the climate finance is mostly required, those are not flowing. But first thing is I need to agree with that reality. There are different ways and means coming in. The entire discussion about enhanced direct access is about this. how you bring finances to the grassroots level, how you give the responsibility to the grassroots to make decisions on finance and access finance directly to their needs. Of course, that discussion is happening, but one of the commonly cited thing is about the capacity. Because if you think the finance provision, of course, there's a huge transparency and accountability aspects tagged into it. So the capacity of the finance receiver is quite important to ensure that this money is being used, in a transparent way, accountable. Of course, there are a lot of issues with regards to that, and we need to solve it. So I think the direction is that, of course, we need to work on it. The current opportunities that the local communities and NGOs have, of course, the NGOs and the civil society organizations are in a much better position to access finance on behalf of grassroots level people. But the opportunities available for those NGOs is very limited, but we see there are a number of opportunities are increasing. But at the same time, there is an evolution about the instruments, the financing instruments, because conventionally we have seen that the NGOs are completely depending on grant financing. But it's a reality that we can't 100% depending on grant financing for NGOs as well. NGOs need to come up with innovative ways of accessing other tools or blended financing options where the communities, this is where we need a little bit of innovation, more capacity building and support for knowledge sharing and creation. And of course, advocacy and support from the youth groups as well to bring this knowledge and capacity to the ground level. Be innovative and how to use the blended financing option more, because the grant financing options are becoming, the space is narrowing down. The competition is too high because it's highly tagged with the macroeconomic indicators of the countries. If your country is say middle income or high income, definitely the grant financing opportunities are very low for NGOs and the grassroots. So this is one. The other aspect of is the engagement of the local governments, how you get the local authorities engaged in the process rather than looking at the central government, because the decentralized governance mechanisms, community governance mechanisms are now playing a big role, and it's getting stage on the climate finance discussions as well. Long way to go, but opportunities are there. But the new opportunities are coming up and we need to be innovative with them. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Ranga, for your response. Perhaps on that last question, I'd incorporate Moses Emil's question from the chat as to how social enterprises, which play an equally key role in climate action activities, can be incorporated in the climate financing discussion. Yeah, Ranga.
I was talking too much, so somebody else can take it.
Javanik?
Yeah, I missed the last end of the question, was it on the social enterprises? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Could you repeat one second again?
All right.
Just so that I respond clearly. Yeah.
Okay. Of late, social enterprises play an equally key role in climate action activities. How do you intend to incorporate them? So how can they be incorporated in the discussion?
Yeah, definitely. Even maybe just starting off from our CFA end as well in developing our sort of project proposals. So maybe just to be clear as well that within the work that we do, we support a lot in developing these proposals. So whereas we don't really get actively involved in the implementation, but in the development phase, one thing which we ensure that there is that cross-cutting involvement. So we involve various sectors. So like I would have mentioned in my presentation that we have, projects around health, project around disability groups. In fact, we have one which is submitted to the GCF and was quite commended, where it included that of young people, the gender inclusion was there, disability groups. So we try to extend our involvement within that project development phase, within the remit of what we do. We ensure that we have these various players within there as well. So we have recognized, of course, that there's the rise of social enterprises, and I think definitely as we progress, there would be within our work program that is greater involvement within that as well, because we want to extend, of course, within our support to national governments to ensure that we engage private sector. So for example, I'll mention that we had this private sector engagement strategy, which we have developed. So private sector plays a key role within that. And of course, we know that young people are now forming a key part of that private sector as well. And also working alongside NGOs. So in fact, we're back to COP26 as well. We are very big on discussions with on these entities that are particularly working along the lines of with NGOs, so particularly on the gender lens as well. So that we have a strong gender focus, a gender work stream, and we're looking to see, of course, we're working with various NGOs within that space, looking at social enterprises, particularly in the African region and so on, that can help provide a technical support so that they then have the capacity, one, to be able to access the finance, develop the solid bankable project proposals, and we feel within that space, then they actually become key players within the overall NDC implementation effort. So that is sort of where our technical assistance is guided on, and there is that initial engagement in that space. Yeah. Hope I answered as clear as possible. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, Giovanni. There's also a question from Mahamadi who asks, how can we get climate finance data? So if someone wants to perform a study on climate finance, where do they get this data?
Of course, I think that is something which, particularly from a Caribbean context, just for a minute, that there's always that gap, particularly from small islands, small states, where we want to see, we want to develop how that evidence, so it's all said and done, but then there is not that enough research. There's not that sort of data. So initially, one of the things which I can mention from our program was that the common sensing program I mentioned, that is focused in the Pacific. So to help to help overcome that challenge, so we're using Earth observation data and through the common sensing platform. Again, it's a very technical, in terms of using the Earth observation, and I am no expert in remote sensing technologies, but it helps generate that climate data, which now the governments can use, and the various local partners can use to help in providing that evidence to support their climate proposal. So that's one example of we're using technology to actually support in developing that. Of course, there would be other gaps in other regions, but we are looking to see how we can sort of replicate that project in other regions, but there is that existing gap. I can tell you from the Caribbean context, there is always that challenge. I know that there is that sort of different facilities being developed. I think there's various climate tools available. So for example, from our end as well, we are working on developing an NDC tracker as well, which would provide a general repository tool for member countries with expensive data along the lines, particularly on the lines of the financing aspect to it. So that is something which we are developing as well, again, to help in addressing that data gap, which we all agree still exists. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your contribution. And yeah, that was a really insightful discussion. I'm sure there's several other questions on the chat, but please feel free to engage, whether it's through email or LinkedIn. Feel free to engage on those social platforms. I'll take this back to Shreya, who will then give us her remarks and close. Thank you so much. I've been Leah Aoko, the moderator for this session. Thanks.
Thank you, Leah. What an interactive session we have. Thank you, everyone, for your active participation. I would like to give just a brief explanation on what we talk about. Our first speaker, Michael, he touched more on finance part of thing. So how finance can enable soft limits of adaptation. He emphasized that we need more funding and more political commitment, as well as there is a need of more reliable information. There are still large investment gap due to misalignment of finance flow, such as there is still high amount of investment in low carbon, in fossil fuel and fossil fuel subsidies than in low carbon tech deployment, which obviously shows that we have a long way to go. And coming to our second speaker, Giovanni, he touched more upon what kinds of work Commonwealth is doing and how it, as an institutional partner, is of the NDC partnership, is supporting Commonwealth member countries to enhance NDCs and update the fast track implementation process of the NDCs. He also touched upon the related Commonsec youth initiatives such as Commonwealth Youth Climate Network, Commonwealth Youth Statement on Climate Change, intergenerational dialogue at COP, and so on. At last, he highlighted why it is important for young people to meaningfully engage in the process. So we are not just as a vulnerable group, but we are also the key stakeholders. Therefore, we should meaningfully engage in the process to make sure that the process is interactive, inclusive for all, and above all, make sure that it is ambitious. He also highlighted that there are few upcoming research work with YOUNGO on climate finance needs on mapping. And finally, coming to our third speaker, Ranga, who highlighted the challenges for integrating young people in NDC implementation, also like the difficulties and opportunities to access climate finance landscapes. And at last, he briefed on financing youth-led actions, which touched upon best practices and innovative youth finance instrument. So as climate change is a global problem and it has a cross-cutting impact on every sector of the society, we need an intersectional approach to tackle climate change. And while talking about climate change, NDCs, mitigation, adaptation, anything that is based on climate change policies and science, we need finance. So I was reading a report of Oxfam, I think it was of 2020, and I saw that more than 80% of the finance is still coming in the form of loans, so which is just adding the debt to the less developed and small island countries, the vulnerable and marginalized countries who are already fighting with the impacts of climate change, and the impacts of climate crisis is also undoing the decades of development, and like it is reversing the progress on poverty, economic inequality. But there is another thing that is like being added, like a burden to the much vulnerable countries, and that is climate loans. So there is still a lot way to go far, but as Ranga mentioned, so when we started talking about loss and damage before a decade, more than a decade ago, there was no agreement, any agreement on loss and damage, but now we have come so far. So loss and damage has gained a very big momentum, and in the COP27 also, it will be a big agenda for everyone. So it just showed that while the issues of climate change and also the negotiation process, the process of getting support from the developed countries who are responsible in creating this global mess, although it is very complex, but we are progressing, and there is still lots of things to do. And here is where young people's expertise, young people's priorities, and young people's skill comes in. So I invite all of you to engage with your government, engage with the stakeholders of your country, and facilitate to engage in this implementation process, and make sure that these climate action projects are inclusive and just for all, rather than being just another maladaptation practices. So I will stop here. Thank you everyone for joining today's session. I hope it was fruitful to you. And we will be doing more source capacity building webinars in coming days on loss and damage, global stock take, and similar other issues. So please be updated on YOUNGO's social media pages. But before we wrap up, it will be good to have a group picture so that will have a beautiful memory. Can I ask everyone to turn on your video? Okay, I'm waiting 1 more minute for the video. Okay. Ready, everyone? Smile. 1, 2, 3, go. Lovely to see your beautiful faces. Just give me 1 more minute. Yes, we are done. Thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Special thanks to our speakers who gave us very insightful presentation. And we hope like many young people are at least able to know more and understand better on climate finance things. Thank you for joining. Thank you, the moderator and Leah, for facilitating the question and answer session. We hope to see more of you in our upcoming capacity building sessions.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Lansinato from
Thank
Burkina
you.
Faso.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.